The Sustainable Development Goals, launched with great optimism in 2015, are currently facing a stark reality of being off track. The global community set ambitious targets for eradicating poverty, improving health, and achieving gender equality, among others. However, progress has been uneven, with many countries struggling to meet their commitments due to a combination of factors, including economic setbacks, political instability, and insufficient funding. For instance, recent reports indicate that poverty rates have not only stalled, but in some regions have even worsened. While climate change continues to escalate, threatening to derail efforts across multiple SDGs. Addressing these setbacks underscores the need to critically reassess the feasibility of the original SDGs and realign our strategies accordingly. The ambitious targets set in 2015 now appear increasingly unrealistic within the initially set time of 2030. As the 2030 deadline looms, it is evident that a more pragmatic and flexible approach is needed to achieve progress in this horizon. Thus, this session aims to explore methods of aligning emerging challenges with the SDGs.
Good morning. Actually, the first session today, the fifth session in the Cairo Forum. The title of the session is The Unfulfilled Promise of SDGs. Now, the SDG came out in 2015 with great promise for fast development in all countries. And after the MDGs, the SDGs came, and the interesting thing about the SDGs is that it does not only focus on one dimension, but it focuses on three dimensions: economic, social, and environmental. After we have only 10 years, or less than 10 years, for the 2030, the end of Agenda 23, or the end of the SDGs. Now, we want to see how countries are doing in terms of the progress toward SDGs. Now, the title of the session, it is The Unfulfilled Promise. So definitely, we are not on track in order to achieve Agenda 23. Let me first try to motivate our discussion. And the best thing to motivate the discussion, I'm an economist, is to state some stylized facts, some numbers. Now, according to the recent data in terms of the SDGs, only 17 targets are on track. 18%, 17% is on track, 18% moderate progress, 30% marginal progress, 18% stagnant, and 17% they are regressed, i.e. they are below the 2015 baseline level. So we can say that a quarter, 25% of the targets of the SDGs are completely unfulfilled. Now, there are specific goals which face major challenges. The first one is SDG 2, zero hunger, and SDG 3, good health and well-being, and SDG 11, sustainable cities and communities, and SDG 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. Now, having said that, let's explore some of these targets. The global hunger, it was quite high in 2023, affecting 9.1% of the global population. That is up from 7.5% in 2019. This means that around 76 million people worldwide face hunger. That is 1 in 11 globally and 1 in 5 in Africa. In 2022, 712 million, that is 9% of global population, lived in extreme poverty, an increase of 23 million from 2019. Does not stop there. About a quarter of urban residents live in slums, totally 1.1 billion in 2022. Now, with COVID-19, the situation got worse. It reversed 2 decades of progress of life expectancy. Life expectancy dropped to 73.1 years, and it was in 2019, 71. So, sorry, it was 70, in 2021, it was 7.1, 71.4, and in 2019, it was 73.1. So, of course, with all the problems, the political instability, the conflicts, in 2023, civilian casualties in armed conflict increased by 72%, the steepest rise since 2015. More of these deaths is attributed to the fight in occupied Palestinian territory. Now, no wonder now that the investment gap to fulfill the SDGs has extremely widened. Actually, the annual SDG investment gap in developing countries was about 4 trillion. This gap is 60% higher than the 2.5 trillion estimated in 2019. So I guess the title of our session today is true. There is an unfulfilled promise of SDGs. Was it too optimistic? Whether that all countries or most countries did not pursue the SDGs as they should. Now, I'm joined by a distinguished panel today. Very interesting because they are quite diversified. We have people from the private sector, we have people who in research, international organization. So definitely they're going to give us lots of food for thought for why this is happening. Let me introduce very quickly the panel. I'm going to start from my right, Dr. Vikram Mathur. I'm pronouncing right. So he's a senior fellow in the Observer Research Foundation. He has a 20 years experience in professional experience. His research focuses on international partnership, foreign policy and economic diplomacy, sustainability, and human security agenda. Dr. Mathur, he received his PhD from Oxford University and his BSc in Chemical and Environmental Engineering from McGill University. Join us from via Zoom, Ms. Dina Sharif. She is the Executive Director of the Center of Development Entrepreneurship in MIT and a senior lecturer at the School of Management. She has 20 years experience in sustainable development, corporate sustainability, women's economic inclusion. She's interested in the role of the private sector in sustainable development, and she is the founding director of the Center of Entrepreneurship for Philanthropy and Civic Engagement at AUC. And to my left, my dear friend, Mr. Stéphane Gubert. He is the country director for Egypt, Yemen, and Djibouti. Prior to the assignment, he was the bank's operation policy director and the Operation Policy and Country Service, and the director of the World Bank International Development Association, IDA. Before joining the bank, he was the economist in the Ministry of Economy and Finance in France, and he holds a master's degree from the École Polytechnique and Sorbonne University. So welcome all of you. Let me start by like a warm-up question. Now, given what I just stated in terms of fact and numbers, what is, from your own point of view, what are the two most important impediments facing the achievement of the SDGs, and why, from your point of view also, you consider them critical and important? Let me start from ladies first. So let me start with Miss
Dina.
Sharif. Dina, go ahead.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
It's okay.
You have just to, in order to speed up the discussion, in order
Don't worry, I am very brief.
So let's be concise, like 3 minutes or 5 minutes max up. Go ahead.
Don't worry, I never take 3 minutes to speak. I just want to say good morning to everybody. Unfortunately, I couldn't be in Egypt. I'm actually in Dubai. I just want to say how lucky you all are to be gathered by the amazing Dr. Abla Abdel Latif. I miss her. She does amazing work, and we need more people like her. So Ahmed, I think I'm going to address your question. I want to say that you made it seem very dismal, but I work in entrepreneurship and innovation, so I'm all about hope. But I do want to say that I think there are some core roadblocks. I think we're really falling behind when it comes to economic inequality and poverty. I think we're lagging behind in resource management and environmental challenges. And I would argue heavily that we continue to lag behind in education and healthcare, which I think are very, very difficult, causing very difficult problems for Egypt. So for me, I would say that the two core impediments to achieving SDGs are two things. One, the inability to apply a systemic lens to building sustainable and inclusive prosperity, and our inability to take advantage of advanced technologies that exist to leapfrog. And so when I say this, I feel that applying a systemic lens to building prosperity is the only way to achieve SDG goals. And that means that we also need to have a mindset of absolutely nobody left behind. And in order to do that, we really need to look at the entire system as a whole. And we need to think about how we can really build an economy and achieve prosperity both bottom up and top down. And I think we're really stuck right now in the top down. And the other thing, I think we're really stuck putting Band-Aids that address the symptoms that exist in our systems, as opposed to really building new systems from the bottom up. And I think systems thinking follows a much more adaptive leadership approach. And that is not very mainstream in how we approach, I would say, public policy, not just in Egypt, but across Africa and global growth markets at large. And we really need to do better. And I think on top of that, we need to not be afraid of using advanced technologies like AI, like blockchain, biotech and genomics, renewable energy technologies, manufacturing technologies. Egypt has so much in terms of assets, especially in the industrial space. If we apply technology to that, we could really leapfrog in terms of achieving productivity within the manufacturing space. So I think if we want to think about building new systems, we really need to think about how we're going to make use of technology to leapfrog and build those systems. So many of you know that in my capacity as an executive director of a center that focuses on entrepreneurship and innovation as a pathway to achieving prosperity. So in other words, we don't focus on the entrepreneur, we focus on entrepreneurship as a means to achieving prosperity. And for that, I think Egypt is lagging extremely behind in our investments in research and development. We need to increase our overall investment in R&D. We need to build the infrastructure that is required to support global standards in R&D. Our universities don't all have the labs that are required to do research and development. That absolutely has to change, because right now Egypt is not a net exporter of innovation. We're actually passive consumers of technology and innovation, and that really needs to change. In order to achieve SDG goals, we need to be able to innovate our way out of these challenges. And I would say further to that, we need to focus on pushing our entrepreneurship and innovation ecosystems locally, which is really an asset in Egypt. We have a strong innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem in comparison to a lot of other countries and a lot of other emerging markets, but we need to focus on investing in innovators who are actually solving SDGs using innovation at scale. And that means that the government needs to partner with investors to push for more patient capital and the de-risking of investment in actual deep tech innovation. And when I say deep tech innovation, I mean innovation that is based on R&D. And so I would say in sum, we need to partner more closely with entrepreneurs who actually have the ability to solve our challenges at scale in a way that is both sustainable and inclusive. In other words, leaving no one behind. And those entrepreneurs exist in our country. The problem is they're leaving. We need to keep them. We need to partner with them. And we need to back them both financially and provide them with the adequate support systems that will allow them to grow and completely transform systems. So I'm going to leave it at that, and I'm happy to expand further in your follow-up questions.
Thank you very much, Dina. So I have some comments, but let me just postpone them until the first round of the first question. Now, Stéphane, same question to you.
Thank you very much, Ahmed. Let me also, like Dina, start by thanking CES for putting this event together. I think it's, I hope it becomes a tradition. It's a beautiful tradition. And in particular, heartfelt thanks to Dr. Abla, who is such a smart, kind, and energetic leader. So a pleasure. Maybe I'll just repeat one or two facts before I answer your question. The World Bank just published yesterday, actually, global reports on poverty, prosperity, and the planet, which kind of confirms some of the trends that you've mentioned. There was progress on the SDGs, but the past couple of years I've seen reversal, and even if it's catching up a little bit now, there's a great fear of this decade between 2020 and 2030 being a lost decade. And we see reversal, you mentioned, on poverty, on inequalities is rising. And even on the climate front, the number of people that are exposed to extreme weather shock is actually increasing rather than decreasing. So, and we've all talked about polycrisis. And so that's kind of the environment we're having that discussion. Egypt, unfortunately, is no exception. Egypt made some progress on different elements of the SDGs. But the UN put out a report this year, and Egypt ranks 83rd out of 166 countries. So it's a lot of challenge. And then last point I want to do as a preamble before responding to your question, I can't help reminding ourselves that actually to have a good conversation on this, you need good publicly available data. And I think that's one of the agenda for the country, just to make sure we can have those discussions on the basis of recent updated data topic we've discussed with you quite a few times. So you gave us a top two for the impediments. So I'll focus on to number one. It's not exactly as Dina, but there's a lot of connections with entrepreneurship and technology, and also looking at the system. My number one would be on economic growth. A beauty of the SDGs was to take an even broader picture than the MDGs, which is great, and all of these dimensions are important, but to make progress on most of them, underneath you need economic growth. And I'll focus on Egypt. Egypt has been growing past 20 years, 2% per capita, which is a reasonable outcome, but lower middle income countries, so countries similar income as Egypt, have grown twice as fast.
Yes.
And when you compound that over 2 decades, it's actually a major difference. Egypt should be starting or continuing a structural transformation to have more entrepreneurs, to export more, to be connected to global value chains. When we look at the past 2 decades, actually, we see that the share of tradables went down from 60% to 50%. So that's kind of the opposite of the structural transformation you'd be expecting, which then translates in lower productivity, and perhaps as important for the country, fewer jobs. This country needs to create jobs. The job creation over the past couple of years have been 2.5% per year, while the working age population is growing 3.1. So fewer jobs than actually the growth of the population. Before I move to my second, I don't want to live with a gloomy picture. I actually believe Egypt has a very strong potential. It has a unique location and an amazing workforce, a big market, trade agreements with a lot of places, and a lot of cultural, natural assets. So there's potential, but that potential is not used, and more growth would be necessary to achieve the SDGs. And my second vote is on the inclusion part. Again, very much echoing Dina's point on leaving no one behind. Inclusion growth needs to be broadened, and its benefit needs to be broadened. In fact, the recent crisis or series of shocks that Egypt has seen, we've seen that even the middle class has been severely affected by those shocks. Inflation, we know, always hurts the poor most. Even in cities, you see more vulnerability now than you used to. Education poverty remains very high, with a lot of kids at age 10 who cannot read a text. And there are a number also of health indicators, such as on diet and overweight, that are not as strong as they should be. And again, I'll finish that second point with not staying gloomy. Actually, if the minister had joined us, she would probably articulate better than I will. But I think there are a lot of promising programs in Takaful and Karama, which the minister Maya Morsi would have focused on. Takaful and Karama is a very strong program that has the promise to avoid leaving anybody behind. On education as well, actually, somewhat surprisingly, Egypt is one of the very few countries that saw an improvement in its learning outcomes during COVID. Most other countries actually saw deterioration. As I said, it's starting from a weak base, and much more is necessary. But we see some progress. Haya Karima is another promising program, and the expansion on universal health insurance also bodes very well for inclusion. So I'll leave you with those two: growth and inclusion, both with in my view, a pretty strong sense that much more is necessary, but also a hopeful line that actually the potential is there to do better.
Thank you, Stefan. So it seems that I am the only one who is pessimistic about the SDGs. So anyway, now let me turn to the Vikram. So the same question to you.
So,
go ahead.
okay, thanks. So I think, well, first of all, thank you for having me here, and really happy to be back in Egypt after some time. I'm also pessimistic, unfortunately, and I'm going to make us feel slightly gloomy again. And I think I come at it a little bit from the perspective of the so-called LDCs, and also I will zoom out and think a little bit globally. So I think the statistics, as you have already stated, are quite sobering. I think for at least of the 150 odd targets, 50% are weak and insufficient, 30% are stalled and reversed. So I think that's a pretty gloomy picture. And if we are to kind of stay on this path, then by 2030, almost 1 billion people around the world will still be living in extreme poverty. Over 100 million children will be stunted, and so really, really sobering statistics. I think to respond to your core question of why I think what is the impediment to, so to speak. I think the impediment was in some sense inbuilt, the way the SDGs were structured and conceived. So that's something I feel strongly. We have about 150 targets, so it's a huge agenda, and it's allegedly a universal agenda. But to me, it's a normative agenda, and the means of implementation for that agenda have not been thought through. I think that was the main problem. And when I talk about the means of implementation, finance and financial resources obviously is a major one. And for many of the LDCs that I work in, some sort of financing, global financing, ODA, is quite critical. The ODA targets within the SDGs themselves were about 7% GDP for OECD countries, and other forums about 1%, but effectively now only 3% of 0.3% of GDP of OECD countries is going towards the implementation of SDGs. So it's less than half. And within that, I think the problem is the balance between what is the grant-based mechanisms and what are debt-based mechanisms, right? So within ODA also, we see that the debt-based mechanisms are increasing, and the grant-based are decreasing. And in many countries, I think about 3.3 billion people, more than 40% of the world's population, live in countries where more is spent on debt repayments than on education and health, right? So I think we agreed in 2015 that the SDGs is a global public good, that it makes sense for the world to achieve these, but the world is not contributing to it. For me, that's a big issue. I think obviously technology is often seen as a silver bullet, and I can be enthusiastic about technologies, but the fact is that many of these technologies are not available to the SDGs. The technologies are proprietary. They're hidden behind all sorts of intellectual property rights. Even basic technologies for access to medicine and IPR waivers, TRIP waivers, and so on and so forth didn't come through. Even if you look at even COVID did not convince the global community to waiver IPR on medical technologies, right? So I think technology can be a tool, but yes, I mean, I come from an emerging market. We have innovation ecosystem, but there are many countries and neighboring countries to India who don't, and they don't have access to those sorts of technologies that they need. I think so. I think those are the kind of bigger issues around means of implementation, and I think that to me is one big challenge. I think the second challenge that you asked is I'm fundamentally a climate scientist, so I do worry about the fact that climate change, in some sense, is in itself impeding the implementation of the SDGs, and it's going to get even more and more complicated to address climate change and prevent it from, impacting the SDGs. But to that extent, I think the problem is while the global community, the OECD countries, and so forth are not contributing as they should or as they committed to the SDGs, they definitely are contributing to increasing climate change and climate impacts. And I know there's a panel on climate finance separately, but I think almost 5 billion people are at high risk from extreme weather events, droughts, cyclones, heat waves, right? So those are pretty sobering statistics. And a major issue with the SDGs was that there is an SDG on climate change, but there are it's one of the weakest SDG. SDG number 3 on climate change is really take urgent action to combat climate change and impact. It does not commit to any finance or any means of implementation. But many SDGs are implicated by climate change. So affordable energy, sustainable cities and communities, and so on and so forth, but also the achievement of hunger targets due to food production, impacts on agriculture, droughts, and so on and so forth will be impacted, coastal infrastructure, access to water resources. So there are many ways in which we can draw the linkages between the SDGs and climate change. And I think the failure of the world to act decisively on climate change is also a major impediment and will continue to be. So those are, I mean, sorry for being pessimistic. I'm a really otherwise optimistic individual, but I think, but I have to be somewhat, yeah, I'm sorry for a pessimistic response, but yeah, I do have an optimistic suggestion.
No,
which I'll cut to later.
thank you for being with me in the club of being pessimistic. Anyway,
So
but,
yeah.
All right. Now, thank you very much for the answers and setting the stage to further discussion. Now, of course, in your response, you did not only responded in terms of the challenges, also you talked about some policies and some of the things that should be done in order to overcome these challenges. But let me just give very quick comments on the things that's being said. Now, Dina, I cannot agree more about the research and development and technology, but just one thing that we should notice is that there is technological divide between developed and versus developing countries. And even within, if you look at Egypt, there is technological divide between urban and countryside. So this is actually in itself, it's a challenge, right? So, and also,
but it's a self-imposed
I'm going to I'm going to give you the floor to response. But so this is one thing that we have to bear in mind, right? And for a research and development, of course, we are talking about Egypt. Now, I used to be in the Ministry of Planning, and this is problematic because in Egypt, for example, we don't have fiscal space, right? We want to increase the spending on R&D, but we have a very limited fiscal space, especially now, right? Not only that, most of the R&D goes to current expenditure, not capital expenditure. So this is, again, this is a challenge that we have to bear in mind, right? So it is not effective. But even if we sum all of the R&D expenditure in Egypt, it is less than 1% of GDP. And if it is less than 1% of GDP, it will not be effective. So how to increase given the limited space? This is a challenge that maybe I want to listen to your reaction to that. Now, Stefan, of course, you mentioned inclusion and structure transformation. This is very true, but not only in Egypt, but even from 4 years ago, before COVID, there was a problem of inequality worldwide. And I remember that in the high-level political forum, we talked about this idea with the UNDP that inequality, this is before 2019, 2020, was rising worldwide. And this is affecting adversely the SDGs. So yes, leaving no one behind. We always talk about leaving no one behind, but actually we are leaving a lot behind because of the rising inequality. So how can we tackle this issue, right? Vikram, so yeah, given that you are pessimistic, so I will not put you on the spot, right? So you are with me, so that's fine. So so I agree with you with the debt and all of these things, and health and education. This is something that I very much in favor. So let us, please, if you can, in the second round of the question, before we're getting to specific questions. So you touch upon the policies. I gave you some comments. So please respond in terms of the policies and the strategies that could be implemented to deal with these challenges, also given my comments. Let's try to be concise in our answers because we want to have time to get to response from the floor. Please, Stefan, so you are first.
Good, thanks. So I focused first on growth. So I think on generating growth, the private sector is essential. So I'll focus my first set of institutional response on this. For growth, obviously, the basics is the macroeconomic stability, so something that has been discussed at length here, including yesterday a great panel on Greece. I think, and I see a couple of friends from the private sector in the room, the question of trust, and I was struck also in the panel on Greece yesterday, the focus on credibility is really important. I think some of the measures that we're seeing now, the tax package that was announced, which is very much designed to rebuild trust with the business community, and I'm sure the Deputy Prime Minister we heard this morning will flesh out further his plan for developing the industry. That will help give more of a perspective and rebuild trust. I think and we all know, again, somebody mentioned yesterday, the reforms are known. It's a matter of focusing and being able to roll them out. We all know a key part here in Egypt is to revise the role of the state and implement the state ownership policy that was laid out 2 years ago. Part of it is to privatize some of the assets, but given the size of the role of the state, part of it is simply to make sure the companies that are managed by the state have a level playing field. And I think that will send a powerful message to the private sector. I really want to emphasize this point about the private sector, because this is where the jobs are creating. I'm sure Dina would say more on the entrepreneurial side. This is where the innovation is going to come from. Dina will respond to your question on R&D, but R&D doesn't need to be within the government budget constraint. R&D is also the innovation that is coming from the private sector. You know Egypt, you see actually a lot of the young entrepreneurs are bringing a lot of innovations. And of course, eventually more private sector is also more taxes and the ability to rebuild the state and indeed focus on the most vulnerable to avoid leaving anyone behind. So that's the first set of policy. I'll do a quick second one. I'll be remiss not to mention institutions. Just a couple of days after the Nobel Prize for Economics was specifically on that topic. I think here in Egypt, so the problem with institutions is that it's very broad. So it can mean a little bit everything to everyone. So I'll focus on 2 points. One, which will be close to ECS heart, the focus on data that I mentioned earlier and on evidence-based policy. It was refreshing to see the new framework of your former ministry, the Ministry of Planning, with 3 pillars. The first one being evidence-based policy. The ministry for a long time has had a lab, an impact evaluation lab. The clarity, having the right data, the right evidence, and having the space to discuss this evidence, I think is really essential. And the second institution that I want to focus on, again, I'll refer back to the Greek experience in the panel yesterday, is the ability for the state to make choices. Most of the choices, any government around the world, they are made through the budgets and the plan. And as was mentioned yesterday, you cannot make choices if your budget is fragmented in many pockets. And so a lot of the recommendations I would have to both to deal with the overall stability, but also to make choices that are giving preferential treatment to the more vulnerable, to Upper Egypt, that are the more vulnerable parts of the country, or to the more vulnerable populations, to be more inclusive. They will come from making better budget decisions, and they will come from having an integrated budget. So I would focus on those 2 set of reforms: enable the private sector, make sure the state has the right role so that the private sector can generate jobs and innovate and do R&D, and then reform institutions, because this is where you're going to get the ability to actually focus on the most vulnerable.
Thank you. I cannot agree with you, Stefan. So because we are running out of time, so let's try to make it quick, please, the response. So Dina, please go ahead. You wanted to
Oh my God, there's so many things I want to say, but I don't know where to start. I think I'll, I agree that there's so many problems, and it does appear very dismal. But I think this all comes down to mindset. And I think ultimately, you know, something I have been talking a lot about lately, when the SDGs were created, and I think when we talk about our inability to achieve the SDGs, we come back and we blame, you know, governments. We say we're not doing enough, which is true. We're not doing enough, but there's a layer beneath that we're not tackling. There are real structural barriers in Africa in particular that are preventing us from achieving SDG goals that are our legacy, that are part of our colonial legacy. And I think that something that is maybe a little bit controversial to say, but I'm going to say it anyway, is that we really need to stop the defeatist and dependency mindset that we have. And that means that we need to switch to having an opportunity mindset that truly leverages collaboration and co-creation and systems change. We are not applying a systems lens to solving our core issues. But also, when we think about Africa, it continues to not be economically sovereign. We continue to be deeply dependent on Western markets. We continue to be places of extraction. We are not developing our industry in a way that allows us to achieve economic agency and to become net exporters as opposed to importers. And I think this is extremely problematic. That has to change. And that's a mindset issue. That's in our hands. That's not something that, you know, we have to wait for somebody else to give us. We just need to decide to have it. Now, with regards to R&D, yeah, I hear you, Ahmed, but I'm going to say that R&D is absolutely critical. We cannot continue to invest such a small amount in R&D in terms of government spending. Having said that, we do have to partner with the private sector. We also have to partner with the philanthropic sector. And that means that we need to encourage both the private sector and the philanthropic sector to stop using philanthropic money to invest in charity that doesn't really solve systemic problems. We need to see philanthropy provide R&D grants, partner with the private sector to solve challenges. We need to see philanthropy de-risk capital in a way that we can have investors invest more intentionally into that kind of innovation. These are things, again, this is about leadership. These are decisions we can make that we're not making. I think we also need to think about keeping our entrepreneurs in the country. You know, I work at MIT. I wish I was working in Egypt, but I'm not. I work at MIT, and down the street, I have Egyptian entrepreneurs who are doing R&D in the labs of Kendall Square. That has to stop. We need to keep our entrepreneurs in the country. We need to work with them to solve our problems. Now, I also want to triple down on something I learned from Dr. Abla Abdelatif. Something that I knew was important, but I never knew how important until over the past decade. We need to rebuild our manufacturing, and we need to not be afraid to use AI to increase our overall productivity. AI can help reboot and recreate our manufacturing space. Egypt has the most diversified economy in Africa. We need to use that as a starting point and really start focusing on empowering the private sector and using the private sector to diversify further the industrial space and continue to export products. And we need to start thinking about how we can look south and partner with the rest of Africa. Africa has the youngest population in the world right now. It will have the highest percentage of people entering the workforce over the next decade. We need to grow south. And that means that we need to work with the private sector to start thinking about how we can take advantage of what will be the largest consumer base over the next decade. Egypt has everything it needs to actually become a net exporter in terms of manufacturing, and also to become a leader across the continent and providing products and services to those across Africa that can go very far in boosting on our economy. I also want to say that Takaful and Karama, because I was there as this program was being designed, I wrote a case study about it. Takaful and Karama is incredible. And when it was put forth, when Ghada Wali was still minister at the time, there are some components that I think are core to how everybody should be thinking about policy making right now. In Takaful and Karama, there was collaboration across sectors, there was co-creation, and there was a use of technology. So we are using technology to enable cash transfers. We need to see that type of mindset go across multiple programs across the government. And we need to definitely see a lot more collaboration across ministries if we really want to see true systems transformation. So I think, I still stand by my initial statement that the biggest impediments continue to be applying a systemic lens. And if you apply a systemic lens, that means that we need to see collaboration, co-creation, we need to use our resources, we need to have an opportunity mindset and not just focus on problems, but see them as opportunities. And the second impediment being we don't need, I hear you about how we don't have access to technology, but that's about mindset. Stop waiting to get access, create your own technology, build up your own innovation capacity. And that requires a certain decolonization of our mind to say that we can actually create the technology we need to solve our own problems and stop waiting to be passive consumers of technology that we need the West to give us access to. It's not going to work. It's not going to happen. So we need to become a lot more intentional about creating our own future.
All right. I cannot agree with you more, Dina. You mentioned very important points regarding the R&D and the importance of the private sector, of course, and how technology can be used in order to, for example, in Takaful Programa, the idea of target, I think it's extremely important. So, I guess the idea of why entrepreneurship, they are leaving Egypt, this is something that needs another session because this is an extremely important topic. And this is something that we have seen it over the past few years. And this is something that definitely affecting Egypt in a negative way. Vikram, so let please respond to in terms of policies and
So,
quickly, please.
Concise.
Yeah.
Can I have my mic, please? Thanks. So, so maybe I'm going to zoom out a little bit, right? And I'm thinking more from, as I said, from a global perspective, and something that I've been worried about, and also, I do think that the environment is a really important part of the whole SDG picture. So, I mean, something that I've written about and I try to suggest is that in addition to the SDGs, we need to have another set of goals, and I call them the SCGs, which is the Sustainable Consumption Goals. And I think we have lots of talk of AI and how AI is transforming the economies in the West and the emerging economies. But the AI has a huge energy footprint. The data centers now in Ireland, I was reading in The Guardian, are consuming more energy than the country itself, right? So I do feel like there needs to be some sort of consumption based targets, especially for the OECD countries on sustainable consumption, and I think the areas where there's a lot that can be done in the US to achieve global sustainability. Could be on food systems, for example, healthy lifestyles, the consumption of single-use plastics, e-waste, waste, and I think what the SDGs did is put all the onus of global action, creating global public goods on the developing countries, and I think yes, we can't wait for technology and we can't wait for ODA, and all those conversations are now almost dated. But I definitely think as we move forward to restrict climate impacts on poor countries and so on and so forth, we really do need to address the issue of rising consumptions. And this is something that we see within India also. The rising middle class, the consumption of, say, energy or many things that are affecting the lives and livelihoods of everybody is 10 to 20 times than the one who's consuming the least. So I think the have-nots and leaving no one behind, this is just an exploratory idea, but something that I'm really keen to think about is that as we move forward, thinking about what comes after SDGs, we really need to think about sustainable consumption goals.
Excellent. So thank you for being concise, and given that you are concise, I'm going to give you the floor again, right? So let me, now we have 15 minutes for the third question, and then we have 15 minutes in order to get questions from the floor. So let us, keep the answer to just 2 minutes, please. So Vikram, now given your research and given your interest, there is very few inter-country cooperation to achieve the SDGs. So it is extremely weak, the inter-country cooperation. From your point of view, why is that, and what are the measures that can be implemented to rectify this situation?
So I think, I'm going to try to respond to that.
2 minutes, please.
At two levels, right? So of course, the first one is that why is the intercountry cooperation not happening? This we saw, for example, if you take the example, I don't know, let's say vaccines, when COVID happened, is that when it gets tough, then countries think about themselves, right? They hoarded vaccines. They closed down their borders, and this whole kind of multilateralism and the world order, in some sense, collapsed. Aid ineffectiveness is very often, and also institutions and all of that. Those are old tropes of arguing against supporting the needs of the least developing countries. So those are the sorts of reasons, I think, and now increasingly we see in sort of, at least in the Indo-Pacific and other areas, that aid and cooperation is all tied to geopolitical interests and connectivity. Right? So I don't know how to change that, the world order challenges, but I definitely think I'm a believer in multilateralism. So I do believe strongly in the re-strengthening of global institutions around the UN and so on and so forth, right? And I don't want to get into a whole thing on what sorts of those changes are needed, but I do think SDGs has to be, and has to be a global, is creating global public goods, and it has to be a global effort. I'm also at the Observer Research Foundation. I was involved in setting up something which is called the Center for New Economic Diplomacy, where I'm really interested in looking at the role that South-South cooperation can play, the role that India can play in Africa, especially, for example, in the education sector, where we have always had an interest, and we have the resources now to invest. So I think South-South cooperation, that early period of South solidarity, and many emerging countries like India, Turkey, Korea, many new donors are there on the scene who can potentially do things differently. So I think that's something that is quite interesting. Also, in terms of development experience, innovation, it's easier to share, especially like, say, in the medical sector and at the other areas, there is more that we can do as an economy on innovation, where we do have technology that is immediately applicable. So I think the role of, that's my personal project in life, which is the role of the emerging economies in kind of working with each other, especially with share and not getting back and sharing technology more freely. So that's something that I think about a lot.
Thank you, Vikram. Now, Stefan, so now, again, and very quickly, now, you did not talk a lot about the World Bank, right? So now, the World Bank, what it can do, other than that, because we're going to have a session dedicated for debt and loans and so on. So what the World Bank can do to support Egypt and countries in the region to speed up the achievement of the SDGs?
Thanks. I'll be brief, and I have 20 seconds each, that should be fine. So the bank is called a bank, so we're known for our finance. I'll just focus on one thing, which echoes what Vikram was saying. For the 70 more vulnerable countries, we have a fund called IDA, which we are replenishing now. That's actually one of the multilateral solutions. It's nowhere near the scale of what's necessary for the SDGs, but that's one of the few that has actually increased over the past couple of years. So I think that's an important source, but it needs support from a lot of partners. We have more than 50 donors, number one. Number two, increasingly we try through our private sector arm, IFC, to de-risk the private sector and help the development of the private sector. And indeed, a bit along the line of where Vikram stopped, not just bringing big companies from the north to the south, but promoting a lot of south-south investments. When you look at the flows, you can see that this is where the potential and growth is. Third, even though all that is about finance, I think a real value we can bring is more on the knowledge side. So that can take the form, in a country like Vietnam, we help the country develop its vision for 2035 that then became their blueprint to align, as I was saying earlier, to create trust and credibility. So that was it in a smaller environment or smaller sector. Recently in Morocco, which is a bit ahead of Egypt and implementing its own state ownership policy, we've put together for them a framework for the implementation of their SOE reform. Number 4 is an extension of the knowledge part, which is about exchanging knowledge between countries. So a lot of the solutions in Egypt, as was said before, they are co-created and evolve within the country, and that co-creation actually is very helpful for other countries. So we've used Takaful Karma is one of the projects we use in many other countries now to say, if you want to design a good social safety net project, this is what a program that works. Same for the work in Upper Egypt around Haya Karima. The campaign the Egyptian government did to eradicate hepatitis C a couple of years ago is also a great example that can be explained to and shared with others. And the final point that I would mention that the World Bank can bring is to help the world tackle global problems. So during COVID, actually, we were one of the first actors with COVAX and Gavi and also the African Union and CDC to finance the delivery of vaccines beyond the countries that are actually producing the vaccines. I think our first such project in the region was in Lebanon next door, and then came here in Egypt. So that we can facilitate bringing this at scale. And then recently we've launched a project that aims for the whole of Africa. In Africa, you have 600 million people that still don't have access to electricity. So the project is called Project 300, which is in partnership with several, but in particular with the African Development Bank, by 2030 to bring 300 million people access to electricity in Africa. So our reach across many countries with both the finance and the technical experience helps us contribute to those kind of global programs. So finance, private sector, knowledge exchange, and global issues.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Stefan, and thank you for being, within the time limit. Now, Dina, you talked about the private sector. Stefan talked about the private sector, but the fact of the matter is that even if you look at this Ababa action agenda, it is stated that most of the impact investment should come from the private sector. Now, the fact is, this is not happening. And if we focus on Egypt, definitely this is not happening. The private sector, the impact investment coming from the private sector is not enough. Now, so can you tell us from your point of view, what is missing from the formula for the private sector to be more engaged and to do more of an impact investment? Dina, let's have 3 minutes to answer. Thank you, Adine.
Yeah, thank you, Ahmed. Impact investing is a bit of a tricky topic. I think I I'm actually very, pessimistic about impact investing. So I'm usually not pessimistic. That is one area I'm pessimistic about. And I'm pessimistic about it with regards to emerging markets for very particular reasons. I think there has been a big discourse around the need to see more impact investing emerge, to see capital flow to social innovators, social entrepreneurs. And I think that's all well and good. But the reality is, I don't think anybody has really bothered to take a step back and define impact. I think the majority of the funds that exist in Egypt when it comes to venture capital and private equity, and these funds often take money from DFIs like the IFC, like Proparco in France, or the European Investment Bank. All these banks have a development mandate. And when they come to invest in these funds as LPs, they basically tie impact to ESG frameworks. ESG frameworks are great, but for me, they are by and large risk mitigators. They're about compliance and managing risk. They are not necessarily about value creation. And for me, impact investing, for it to be effective, needs to be about value creation at multiple levels. We need to be seeing societal change. We need to be seeing job creation, wealth creation. We need to see multidimensional layers of value creation achieved. But that means that we also need to take risk and really invest in ideas that have the potential to solve societal challenges at scale using technology and innovation. Governments can play a big role in de-risking those types of investments for venture capital funds and private equity firms. And we're not doing that yet. Can we do it? Probably yes. Are we doing it? No. Is the World Bank and IMF doing it? Not really either. So I think, do we need impact investing? Absolutely. Do we need a different type of investing within our risk capital space in Egypt? 100%, because we are following a pure Silicon Valley playbook that doesn't work. We need to see much more patient capital, but we also need to see we need to see venture capitalists understand that in order for us to achieve impact, we need to be investing in entrepreneurs who are applying a systems lens to solving their problems. And we also need to think about, as we build out our portfolio of companies within these funds, that we're actually investing in companies that, when combined together, are transforming a system that is tied to a national goal or priority. And that we're not seeing. So I would say the two most important things is we need to see governments de-risk, but we also need the government to talk more openly with the private sector, specifically investors, to actually explain to them what the national agenda is, what are our national priorities, where we need to see innovation at scale, where do we need to see systemic transformation, and funds should be allocating capital in accordance with that, with those innovation agendas. And I would say my last point would be that we need to see that our own private capital, as in wealth created in Egypt, actually reinvested into funds that are created. And that means that our investment landscape for now is largely dependent on raising capital from the West. And we need to see more capital come from our part of the world, from our country, and from Africa, actually be invested into these funds with a different kind of playbook that is actually contextualized to our needs and to the situations and circumstances that we are in. So I think I'll stop there to stick to my 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Dina. Now, I have lots of comments and lots of questions to our distinguished panelists, but I think it would be a good idea to listen from you. If you have any comments, if you have any questions addressed to, and please try to make it specific to one of the panelists, right? And make it concise, please. Dr. Heba, please.
Thank you so much for a fascinating, panel. Dina, I totally agree with you. And there is a whole book called Decolonizing the Mind. And interestingly, a very, I lost a report that came out in June, said 16% of the goals, the SDGs, have been happening, and the Nordic regions coming up, performing the whole world. So we're still moving. And the whole point is SDGs is happening. I mean, not the world system is not changing. I mean, still the rich are the rich, and those, so it's nothing. Now, my question or comment to Dina, I totally agree with you. The way we need to sort of shift the mindsets and how we work on this, because I personally, for example, I know all the SDGs. I'm so much in the feminist thing and whatever it is, but we need to address the culture and the society, because I've been into this, and in Bahira, and when we're doing a sustainable development report, we've been met with all of these challenges. And when you receive a fund, you have to work within them, not realizing the culture. So it's a comment and a question, and I totally agree with everything you said. How we work it this way, how we build on shifting and decolonizing the mind by making us build our own thing, innovate our own technology and resources, instead of always depending on the other. And as I believe in Africa, the richest continent in the whole world, which should be in control of its own resources. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Eba. Other questions? Other comments? Please. Dr. Mona, please. And then the gentleman behind.
Thank you, Dr. Kameli, and thank you all our distinguished speakers. I cannot agree more with Dr. Dina and Dr. Kameli when you mentioned the issue regarding research and development, entrepreneurship, to what extent it's very important for Egypt. Also, I agree with what Dina mentioned regarding that we have to create our technology and to create our future. At the same time, I agree with Dr. Kameli when you mentioned that we don't have physical space to deal with this, and we have to think about the limitation that we have. But let me here raise a point which is really very important, the priority. I think if we believe in the importance of research and development and entrepreneurship, we will invest in this issue. Yes, we have to build the relation with the private sector, but it's very important to start by the government also. And let me give you an example. In Egypt, in the last decade, maybe we built more than 70 universities. But at the same time, we didn't send just one student to learn abroad, to learn in one of the topic universities. And we depend on the withdrawing the professors from the public university. So this means that we prefer to invest in hard infrastructure instead of soft infrastructure. So I think that we have to revise our priorities. This is a very important issue before talking about the physical.
Thank you, Dr. Mona, for this excellent comment. I cannot agree more. The gentleman behind, please. لو عاوز ان انت تقوله بالعربي انا ممكن اترجم. كنت اتفضل لو حضرتك عاوز.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. على غرار النسب التي وردها دكتور احمد كمالي لاهداف التنميه المستدامه، ومنها التقدم الهامشي والتقدم الصحيح وغيرها من النسب بالنسبه للاهداف، وعلى غرار التشاؤم الذي ابداه جميع المتحدثين في هذه الجلسه، هل نستطيع ان نقسم التشاؤم الى قصير الاجل ومتوسط الاجل وطويل الاجل على غرار الخطط والمده الزمنيه بتاعتها، ام ترون التشاؤم كله ما بعد طويل الاجل؟ وعلى الوجه الاخر، كيف نتحول من التشاؤم القصير والمتوسط والطويل الى تفاؤل مستدام او تفاؤل مستمر؟ وعلى الجانب الاخر من السؤال، زي ما الدكتوره هدى نقطه صغيره، هل بالنسبه للثقافات، هل تحتاج الدول الناميه الى استراتيجيه وطنيه للمسؤوليه الاجتماعيه بمؤسساتها الحكوميه والتعليميه والشبابيه والرياضيه المختلفه لاعطاء دفعه قويه تساهم في تحقيق اهداف التنميه المستدامه؟ شكرا يا فندم.
هو انا يعني لو قلت ترجمت الجميع السؤال هم هيخلص السيشن، فانا هاخد بعد اذن حضرتك جزء منه. Right now, the gentleman is asking. We talked about the targets of the SDGs, and it seems that according to the data, we are off track in most of the SDGs. So there is this sense of pessimism in terms of reaching the SDGs. So can we divide this pessimism into short, medium, and long term in order to deal with such thing? So can we have at the end some optimism in terms of the SDGs? Thank you. So let's hear from you. So I guess if you want to start, Dina, go ahead. So if quick response. and then
Yeah.
Stefan, and then
Hey.
Victor.
Yeah, happy to. First of all, I just want to say to Dr. Hiba, you speak to my soul. I agree. Africa is the greatest continent on earth. So thank you for that. But I think for me, if we want to really change mindset to one that really moves away from a colonized mind to a decolonized mind, we need to be able to talk about it. So mindset shifts only happen when we are not afraid to have open conversations and start removing some of these internalized barriers in our mind, right? It's like when we talk about the patriarchy as women, and we say, oh, we want to see more inclusion of women within a largely patriarchal system. But before we do that, we need to first address the patriarchy that is in all of us, including women, because we all were raised in this system. And same with decolonizing the mind. So I actually, every semester, when I teach at MIT now, I teach a class that only addresses students from emerging markets who want to start ventures, impact innovation-driven ventures in emerging markets. The first thing I do is I make them take a quiz to see how colonized their mind is. And almost always, about 90% of the class has a completely colonized mindset. It's extremely problematic because how can you actually create economic agency if we're still stuck in that mindset? So the only way to go about it is to have conversations, to discuss it openly amongst policymakers, to discuss it openly in the private sector, to discuss it openly in our classrooms as educators. We just need to talk about it so that you start catching yourself when you fall into the mindset that was handed to us as opposed to a mindset that we created. And it does work because I've seen it work. And I would say the last point to move on, Ahmed, I know you want to go. I also have to go about the R&D and infrastructure. I mean, honestly, I really think that this is a leadership issue. If we want to see more R&D and create more space and create more infrastructure for R&D, we will do it because I have seen Egypt do the unimaginable. If we want to do it, we will do it. We partner with the right people, we partner with the right resources, we create the space, we create the infrastructure, we really create technology transfer offices on our university campuses, we collaborate together across universities, and we start exporting innovation. It's as simple as that.
Thank you, Adina. Now, Vikram, can you address the question of the gentleman regarding the SDGs, the pessimism, given that we both of us share this pessimistic view, right?
So if I was to interpret it right, you were saying, is there a way to, since we're like 6 years away from 2030, think about what can be immediately done, and I mean, so this kind of idea of big bets, right, that we have also been talking about, and I think, I don't know if it can be achieved, but I would say there are certain SDGs that are, and this is to Dina's point about systemic, I do feel like education is a major area where, massive investments can lead to systemic change, but also, and when I talk about education, it's also R&D and so on and so forth. So I think that's a big area. The other area, I mean, I think I like to think about is the health sector, because I feel like someone who works on climate, I know what the impact climate change is going to have on health and, particularly extreme heat and so on and so forth, or vector-borne diseases. So I think that's another big bet and an area that we need to think about, where we could have, systemic impact. It could deal with issues of hunger, malnutrition, and some of those serious problems. Yeah, so I would say health, education are really critical areas. I also feel like when it comes to energy, we are at a tipping point. Like I feel like there I'm quite optimistic that transitions are happening and new energies are coming on board. And I think we're around the corner from solving the crisis around energy access and poverty. Largely driven by technology, right? So I think that's another area of interest, and it also makes for the private sector, private capital to flow into that area, because these are bankable projects, right? So I would say let me leave it with those 3 ideas.
Thank you, Vikram. So I cannot agree more with this idea of human capital, health, and education. So now the last word to my friend, Stefan. Go ahead.
It looks like this panel should have been called optimistic or pessimistic. So
Yeah.
I'll leave you with a quote from the German writer Goethe, who said, the pessimist condemns himself or herself to be an observer. So I think we need to be brutally realistic about the situation, but we need to be optimistic. I mean, it's a mindset that things can change.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, please join me for a round of applause to our panelists. Thank you very much.